remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo. Good morning, everybody. Starting off with a lie here because it's not Monday. I'm doing my Monday book report on Saturday for reasons that will become apparent. And the song I'm playing, Crazy by Gnarls Barkley, is very apropos because the book I'm going to review is crazy. it just is, you know. And in 2018, I was diagnosed with severe rheumatoid arthritis. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, all your immune system basically attacks you, and so all my joints swelled up, they stiffened up, and I basically became a zombie. I couldn't move. I was frozen, and all I could do was sit on the couch. And just as an example, in the blood test you take, the marker for normal inflammation is somewhere below 12, I think, and I was in the 400s. So yeah, my rheumatologist said I was the most severe case he'd been treating at that time. So it was really, really bad, and all I could do was watch TV. I could basically just operate the remote, and that was it, and surf the computer and the internet. So I stumbled across a program called Scientology in the Aftermath with Leah Remini, and man, did I ever go down that rabbit hole. I mean, that I couldn't get enough of it. It just was fascinating, this religion of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, and it just is an endless amount of information. And the first book I bought was this book. It was called let me get it on there. Scientology A to Xenu, Insider's Guide to What Scientology is Really All About. And if you only read one book about Scientology, and there are many, it should be this one, because it is extremely well written, extremely informative. He doesn't leave anything out, but then he doesn't go off into the weeds either and gets on a tangent and talking about his personal opinions and stuff. It's all fact-based, and so it's just a fascinating book. I've read it twice, and it's just, you know, I'll probably read it a few more times before I die, just because it's so interesting. And as a special surprise today, we have the author. He is Chris Shelton. And let me see, what did I write about him? He's author, YouTuber, and critical thinker extraordinaire. And he's also recently got his master's degree. I'm not sure in what subject. I'll ask him about that, but let's welcome him to the program. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me on. What a generous and nice introduction you gave there. Thank you very much for that.
Well, you're one of my favorite YouTubers. I immediately sought you out the second that I saw you on Leah Remini's show. How many times were you on, by the way?
Well, I got to be on that one twice, and I got to also consult as a behind the scenes guy on season 2 and 3 of that show. So it was fun.
Well, that must have been fascinating.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah. What's Leah Remini really like?
She's nice exactly like she is on the show.
Yeah, I call it New York nice.
Yes, that's right. Brooklyn nice. There you go. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. People that I know from New York are almost, you know, all really, really nice people, but they don't suffer fools lately. They will let you know exactly what they're thinking. So where were you born and raised? Let's start it off at the beginning.
Sure. I was born and raised in California. I was actually born in Port Hueneme. My dad was in the Navy at the time. So that's, southern central California. And then I grew up in Pasadena.
Pasadena, California. So
yeah, Rose Parade and all that.
So then how did you become involved in Scientology?
Well, my folks got involved when I was a kid, and they were actually divorced when I was about 2 years old. Their marriage was not working out. And my dad's brother, my uncle, sort of promoted Scientology to my dad, got him involved with a course. And then my dad got my mom involved, and then they got back together. And so that's how I kind of got involved. I was like 4 years old at the time. And they became very involved in Scientology, went really all in on it. And I started working for the church in Pasadena. And so I was raised around it. I was, all of our friends and, people I knew as a kid and stuff.
So
Were
you really knew nothing else?
Well, I went to public school, so I was aware of other ideas and other religions and stuff, but Scientology was how I was raised. That was the moral foundation and the religious upbringing that I had was in a Scientology household.
So what is a wog?
Well, okay, so that's a very derogatory term, mostly in the UK for people from the Indian subcontinent, as I understand it. But Hubbard absconded with that word because he was in the UK in the 1960s, and he uses that term to talk about anyone who's not a Scientologist.
So I'm a wog?
You are a wog, yes,
So
as far as Scientologists are.
I would be looked down upon from a
Yes,
Scientologist point of view?
you would
Because
be.
as far as I know, I've never met one. I mean, I live in BC. I think we have maybe 200 Scientologists in all of British Columbia, which
Right.
is like 2/3 the size of Texas. It's
Yeah.
a pretty large chunk of land. Now in Canada, Scientology is not considered a religion for tax purposes. It does have some tax exemptions, and they are allowed to do marriages and take days. They are allowed, like by government mandate, that any Scientological holidays they are allowed to take that day off. And so, as far as that goes, but they don't get the tax free status that they have in the U.S. Now, how did Scientology always have that tax exempt status? Were they always considered a religion? Because as far as I know, like L. Ron Hubbard discovered Scientology in the 50s. Is that right?
That's right.
And
And
so did
well, the
they?
way it went down, the way it went down was in 1950, he wrote Dianetics and he presented it as a science. In 1953, he had switched over and he founded the Church of Scientology as a religious organization. And that's where he ran with that for the next many decades. The church applied for and got tax exempt status by 1956. They had it taken away from them after an investigation by the IRS in 1967. Hubbard was found to be personally profiting from Scientology to the tune of millions of dollars. And so they removed the tax exempt status, canceled it. Scientology did not pay any taxes and fought that. And in 1993, they got their tax exemption back from the IRS, and they've had it ever since in the United States.
Okay, I understand that's quite a story in itself, how they got it.
Yeah.
How they got it back, like through surreptition and
blackmail.
Blackmail.
Yeah.
That's a good word. That's a good
Pressure.
word.
You could say public
Pressure. Yeah. Like you
they
have
exerted.
to have
Yes.
you have to have some level of gumption to go after the IRS. Like they had lawsuits, like individual lawsuits against individual IRS agents.
Over 1,000 of them.
Wow. And
individual lawsuits.
And so the IRS was spending so much money tending to these court proceedings that they just gave up, and they said, okay, you can have it, and from what I understand, like watching the Going Clear documentary, they had like a $2 billion tax debt wiped right out. And just amazing stuff.
They really got away with murder getting their tax exemption back in 93. They really, as difficult as it might be to imagine doing this, they really did strong arm the IRS.
Wow.
And that's saying something. That is a ballsy move, and Scientology pulled it off.
No doubt. I mean, like our IRS is called the Canadian Revenue Agency, and I hate dealing with them. It is a last resort that I will make that phone call. Like I do not want to talk to them. I do, and so for you to actually attack the IRS, which had way more powers than ours ours does. It's just crazy. Now, can you explain Dianetics and Scientology in kind of a brief way? Well, what
Sure.
it is as a religion, like what do they believe? What is their tenets?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course. First off, I always try to lead with this now. Scientology is a money-making scam.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so
I
just
got that from your book.
yeah, just to be clear, right? It's really a business, wolf in religious sheep's clothing, right? But how they put the public display of this, what they tell people and how it looks is that Dianetics is a science of the mind that deals with trauma and stress in your past and ways methods of dealing with that trauma and erasing it so it's no longer affecting you. Excuse me. And then there is Scientology, which is an applied religious philosophy that contains a set of techniques and tools that you can use to improve your life and those of others around you. The product of Scientology is improved conditions in life. And it's a tool set you can use. There are very practical things that you do in Scientology. They tell you that they don't ask you to believe in anything. They only ask you to use it, see if it works, and if it does, then it works for you. And there you go, right? And it's a very workable technology, a series of techniques or practices. So that's how they talk about it. But what Scientology really is a graduated series of indoctrination steps that you pay for. Every level of Scientology is you have to pay for it. These are called religious donations, but they are mandated and they are exactly priced out. They have price lists in Scientology, which is something you'll never find in a Catholic church.
No.
And through the series of indoctrination steps, you are they talk about it as though you are crossing a bridge from the current condition you are in as a regular, degraded, not well off, not happy, not centered, not mindful individual. You're very messed up right now. And you take these series of steps and you cross this bridge to a better place, right? Over this, chasm of darkness and awfulness. And you confront all of the trauma and evil that is inside of you through these steps. And by doing so, you achieve a state of personal spiritual immortality and freedom. And that is what Scientology is selling: is hope, freedom, and your eternity, whatever that means to you.
Yeah, I read what is the quote? I think it's Joseph Goebbels, but he said
Goebbels? Wow,
yeah.
really?
I think it was him, but you may be able to correct me on this. Who said
Yeah,
it?
what's
But
that?
the easiest way to enslave people is to promise them freedom.
Oh, that sounds like something Hubbard would say.
Could be. I don't know
Yeah.
where I read it. I don't know
He
where I
says,
heard it.
because, like, for example, one of the quotes that Hubbard gives is one of the easiest ways to control people is to lie to them.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've heard that one too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They promise freedom while they themselves are slaves to depravity. This is biblical quotes.
Hmm.
I don't know about Goebbels, but interesting. Yeah.
Goebbels. Yeah. I pronounce it Goebbels. I don't know.
Got
So,
the R in
yeah.
there.
I've read the history of the Third Reich 3 or 4 times.
Is that how you say it in German? Is you put the R sound in there?
I believe so. I've always
Ah,
pronounced it Goebbels. So yeah,
Goebbels. I've
it
always heard it as Goebbels. So
rhymes with gerbils. Yeah. So
interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know. I could be wrong too. Like I
No,
said,
no, it's all
I've been
good.
saying it that way my whole life, and I could be wrong. Now, n- now keeping with the IRS, with the new uh, uh, infrastructure bill, I think it is. They're hiring 86,000 new IRS employees,
Uh-huh.
and now with that expansion, because I know the IRS has been gutted by the government for years and years and years, and so they
Yep.
just don't have time to go after, like, they consider Scientology like small potatoes, right? They don't
Yeah.
have the resources to go after such a small entity, and so with these 86,000 new, do you think they'll go after Scientology? Do you think they'll try to revoke
Probably
their
not.
status? Because
No.
that would be the end of Scientology as a practical matter, right? If they lost that tax exempt status.
Well, see, that's a big argument right now, and I say no. Actually, I don't think that taking away Scientology's tax exempt status is the nail in the coffin for them. I think that it would absolutely be a crushing blow to them. It would hurt them. But Scientology, let's remember, Scientology survived not having tax exemption from 1967 and 1993. And they're willing to bunker down and do it again. So that's not going to end Scientology if they lose their tax exemption. But it is still something that should be done because they don't deserve to have tax exemption. They are an abusive cult. They do hurt people. Their practices are harmful. And so they don't, there's nothing constructive or societally, useful about Scientology. They don't deserve tax exemption for that reason.
Yeah.
But ending Scientology is going to take a lot more than just taking away their tax exemption.
Well, they simply have so much money, right?
Yeah.
They have buildings all over the world, and although they're empty mostly, they're they're still a going concern, and I imagine they have so much money in the bank. And because I read Tony Ortega quite a bit, and he discusses the whales, and the people who just give millions and millions of dollars, like for nothing, just as a straight donation. I mean, I think there's one millionaire or billionaire who's given over $500 million, something like that, 350 million, something like that.
Bob Duggan.
That's right. And that's incredible. Like, and
well, the real asset that Scientology has on its side that is irreplaceable and very, very powerful is the fact that they have a dedicated core group of people, both in and outside of the Sea organization, who will do anything for Scientology, give it money, work basically work as slaves for it, dedicate their entire lives to it. They consider it's the most important thing in the world. In other words, they're fanatical about it. And Scientology has a base of people who are very, very fanatical about those beliefs.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that's going to keep it going.
Right, as most high control groups do.
That's right.
Now, when I was a kid, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and someone we knew became a Jehovah's Witness. And I was asking my mom about it, like, what is a Jehovah's Witness? What is so different about it? And she said, you really don't want to know, but I will tell you this. If anybody, and my mom was a simple woman, she wasn't an educated woman, she just was a housewife and took care of her kids. That's all that mattered to her. So she wasn't a worldly woman. So, but she told me, she said, if anybody comes to you and says they have all the answers, run as fast as you can in the opposite direction, because nobody has all the answers. Nobody knows for sure. And that always stuck with me. And then when I was in my early 20s and I saw the Dianetic commercials, the exploding volcano and all that, and I thought my mom's words just came straight back to me, and I just put it back, and I said, this is not for me, and I just, oh yeah, that has always stuck with me, that my mom telling me that, because nobody has all the answers. Now,
wise words.
Yeah, and I'm not here to disparage anybody's belief system. You have every right to believe anything you want. That's what you want to believe. L. Ron Hubbard has all the answers. You are free to believe that. You have at her. I'm not here to make fun of anybody or to try to tear them down. So, but
well, I think there's a difference between ridiculing or tearing down or insulting and questioning somebody's judgment over the wisdom of what they're doing. And I think with Scientology, we're free to do that without in any way impugning a person's right to believe. You can believe whatever you want, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to ask you about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had a Jehovah's Witness friend. We used to go golfing all the time, and in reality, he wasn't supposed to hang out with me because I was a worldly person and not part of the church. But he bent the rules a little bit, and we got along great. And when I got I was getting married for the first time, he actually gave me a gift. It was a book um, on marital relations, how to make your marriage stronger, and it was, all basically Jehovah's Witness and propaganda. But the fact that he gave it to me was, I took it as an honor, because that's how highly he thought of me, that I was, but then I also realized too that his job was to try to get me into the church. And so he had to try to get anybody he knew to convert. So now
Sure.
now Hubbard, uh what was his background? Why did he consider himself, like, as far as I remember him, he was a science fiction writer, and I saw his books. I haven't read any, but I've heard some of them are quite good. And so, but why does being a science fiction writer make you um smarter than everybody else? And you come up with all the answers. So
Well,
how did he go from being a science fiction writer to being a religious leader?
right. Well, first off, let's be clear that Hubbard wrote about many more genres than just science fiction. And so Hubbard was a writer of pulp fiction and of news articles and journal articles. That's what Hubbard wrote. And so he wrote romance, Western, fantasy, sci-fi, spy novels. I mean, he wrote across all of these things. Hubbard just wrote. That was his job, and that's how he made a living through the Depression and through, after the war. He went back to that. So it wasn't obvious at the time that Hubbard wrote Dianetics and put forward Scientology that he was just a sci-fi writer. And being a writer in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s actually was a position of there was some degree of respect connected with that. And in the field of pulp fiction or science fiction, legitimate engineers and writers and scientists, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, there were a number of names, Arthur C. Clarke, who we still revere for their science fiction and for their science. And Hubbard positioned himself with those guys. And there was a lot of respect given in those directions because some of those scientists and engineers actually substantially contributed to the field of science, jet propulsion, NASA, that kind of thing, aeronautics, and all the discovery that was going on back then was being fueled by some of these writers who were also putting forward a future that that inspired people to do science and get up to the moon and stuff like that. So Hubbard was kind of riding on the coattails of those guys. And he wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a legitimate engineer. He had no real scientific background, but he palled around with these guys and would name drop them all the time. And that's how people would look at Hubbard as a legitimate philosopher or scientist. He wasn't, but those guys were. And so he was making out that he was one of them, you see. And this is how he got credentialed in 1950 when he came out with Dianetics, is it was like, oh, here's another engineer, scientist, writer type presenting his work. And he has supposedly, he would tell these long stories about how he had been involved in the first class in atomic and nuclear phenomena at George Washington University. Even though he failed out of that class, he would brag about being in it, right, without talking about his failures. And he would talk about his war years and what a successful war hero he was, even though he actually didn't see a day of combat. So Hubbard had a real gift of gab and a real ability to fool people in the moment as to his credentials and his reasoning ability. And that's how he got the credibility that he had to put Dianetics out there and have it be taken seriously.
Well, back in the pre-Google days where you couldn't
exactly,
you couldn't go and find out this information, at least not easily. I guess people tend just to take you at your word, and he was a BS artist of the highest order. Now, wasn't he also friends with Jack Parsons, who was part of the jet propulsion experiment? So did he get some of his ideas from from him?
Well, probably not, because most of Hubbard's science fiction was already written by then. You know, he did do a few more stories after 1950 on the sci-fi route. And of course, in 1980, he wrote Battlefield Earth. But Parsons' influence on Hubbard actually had more to do with the occult and Thelemic, mystical, Aleister Crowley, black magic, sex magic practices than it did with science. Jack Parsons, was a fascinating character in history because he was an occultist and a practitioner of Aleister Crowley's Thelemic practices, but he was also a legit rocket scientist who was developing jet propulsion fuel, hard, solid fuel. And he was an innovator in that field. He was out there blowing up stuff and trying to figure out how to make it more efficient and make it blow up better so it could power rockets that would provide the lift to go to the moon. So that's what Parsons was doing professionally and personally. And L. Ron Hubbard connected up with him. I think it was 46 or something, 1945, 46. And he hooked up with him because in Parsons' personal life, he had a mansion in Pasadena. It actually was 5 minutes away from where I grew up in Pasadena.
Oh, really?
I used to ride by it.
Is it still there?
Newspaper route, and I had no idea.
Is it still there, or is it?
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, the house is still there. And Parsons' house was like sort of a bohemian refugee, like people would go there and just hang out, mystics and occult people and gypsies, just odd groups of people. And Hubbard heard about this through his writing circles, and this was all after the war, and Hubbard was bouncing around in California. He didn't want to go back to his family. He didn't have any a real loyalty to his wife or kids who were up in Washington State. And he didn't want to have anything to do with that. So he stayed down here down in California, and he ended up hooking up with Parsons, showed up at his house, stayed at his place, ended up stealing his girlfriend and involving himself with Parsons' occult practices. Excuse me. And I'm talking full-blown sex, blood, magic, really weird stuff.
Really?
And crazy weird stuff. And we're talking about sexual practices, maybe homosexual practices. We don't know. We don't know exactly precisely what they did together. There are journal entries and stuff, but it doesn't get real super specific. But we do know that they were involved in actual ritual magic, and they believed in it. And Hubbard at least convinced Parsons that he was a true believer in this. And from Hubbard's personal writings around that time, we have reason to believe that Hubbard actually believed in the occult. And he talks, for example, about having a guardian angel spirit who would watch over him, a woman in an emerald dress with flaming red hair. And he would talk about how he had seen this spirit on the wing of his plane back in his barnstorming days. So Hubbard seemed to really believe in this stuff. And that was the major influence that Jack Parsons had on Hubbard for a very brief period of time. It was only about 4 or 5 months that they were together.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. It wasn't that long.
No.
In Going Clear, the documentary, I think they said they tried to create the Antichrist. Like they tried to
do what was called the Babylon working, which has to do with a summoning ritual that ended up supposed to bring this whore of Babylon into being. It's sort of this extra dimensional sort of thing. And it's all sort of it's a very confused dogma coming out of Aleister Crowley's drug-addled visions.
Right.
So you can imagine there's a lot of weird goofiness with this, and it doesn't make a lot of coherent sense. You have to dive deep into the mystical literature of Aleister Crowley for this stuff to make a lot of sense. And I've tried, and it's really hard.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get
too weird, drug-addled stuff. It's just weird.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off into the weeds here, but it is fascinating. Like I say, this is an endless rabbit hole of information that you can that it just one door leads to 6 more doors, and then so
That's right.
6 doors lead to 12 more doors, and it just
Well, let me summarize it. Actually, I think I can summarize this for you quite easily, though, because Hubbard actually talked openly in a few of his lectures about his connection with Aleister Crowley and about the history of the subject of magic. And this is something Hubbard clearly knew something about. And one of the things that he said that deals about magic and about rituals is that it's about control, and that you can control people without them really knowing or understanding what you're doing to them. He was talking about manipulating people, and Hubbard had a real kick. He was really on a he really thought this was a clever, intelligent thing to be doing with his wits. We're figuring out how to manipulate and control other people without them realizing what he was doing. And magic was a way or a route to be able to enable him to do that. So was hypnotism. So were the ascended masters concept out of New Age philosophy, which is what he used to build his bridge in Scientology. Those levels of indoctrination are very, very parallel with Freemasonry and other earlier practices. So he incorporated all of this stuff, all this occult stuff, into Scientology, but he didn't tell people this is what he was doing. He was literally practicing what he was preaching by fooling people and manipulating people without them knowing what he was doing. It's really complicated, but it's and bizarre. But the simplicity is the big inside joke that Hubbard was playing on everybody was he was controlling them by making them think they were achieving personal freedom and immortality when in fact they're really just becoming Hubbard's slaves. I wouldn't use terminology like that, except Hubbard used that terminology himself in his own writings when he talked about wanting to make men his slaves. And that's exactly what he did with Scientology. So it's not even ironic. It's more of wish fulfillment. It's Hubbard's wish fulfillment. That's kind of what Scientology really is at the bottom of the whole thing. It's very simple, but at the same time, it's wildly complicated.
Wow! Holy cow!
Yeah, it's trippy stuff, man. It's really wild.
Wow! Man,
yeah,
I mean, like, when I played that song "Crazy," I didn't realize how apropos.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was so appropriate. I was like, Jerry's right on it, man.
So, let's get back to your personal story here. Now, do you have siblings?
I have a brother. Yes.
Now, is he a Scientologist?
No, he was the one in the family who resisted it successfully his entire life. My parents actually got out before I did. They realized the truth of things after I really went all in on it as an adult. And they got out. My brother never got in. And eventually they helped me to, they were a bit of my support system when I finally escaped and got out of it.
Now, Scientology has, like, with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's disfellowship, and Scientology, it's disconnection.
Correct.
So it's where you are declared a suppressive person, and you have to separate yourself completely from that person, right? So did you have to disconnect from your brother?
Oh, no. But nobody in my family, just because he wouldn't become a Scientologist or get involved with Scientology, didn't make him a suppressive person.
Okay.
In order to be labeled a suppressive in Scientology, you have to take overt actions against the church. You have to demonstrate that you are anti-Scientology. Whether you're a public critic of Scientology, or you go on the news media and talk about Scientology in a negative way, or you try to get people out of Scientology proactively, that's the kind of thing that's going to get you labeled a suppressive.
Okay, so you're a suppressive person now.
I am officially labeled a suppressive person.
Now, did you
I left Scientology and I started speaking out publicly against it.
Right. So now, as I understand it, Hubbard said that only 2.5% of the population were suppressive people, but with Miscavige now, David Miscavige is now the head of Scientology, right?
Yep.
Now, with him, it seems to be the other way around. It seems to be
Yeah,
98.5%,
it really
97.5%
is.
are suppressive, and 2.5%
That's
are
right.
good, So,
That's right.
did you actually get your declare order? Like, I know they would give you a declare order on goldenrod paper or something like that. So, did,
Correct.
did
Yeah.
you get that?
I did not. They wouldn't give it to me. Here's
Really?
what happened is in the early 2000s, with the blossoming and promotion of the internet, Scientologists, ex-Scientologists, started posting copies of their SP declares, this formalized document that lays out in paragraph after paragraph all the things you, this suppressive person, have done that are evil and horrible and awful, and why you must be destroyed. They list it all out in this big long document that usually goes on for a couple pages. And then they say at the end of the document, and therefore Joe Schmo is declared a suppressive person. And if he ever comes to his senses, his only person he can talk to in Scientology is this guy called the International Justice Chief. And you can sort out your suppressive person declare with that guy. Otherwise, you don't have the right to talk to any Scientologist ever for any reason. You're completely shunned and disconnected from every Scientologist anywhere in the world. And that's the penalty for being declared a suppressive person. And usually the write-ups were just character assassination. They did this and they did that and they said this and they did this. And all of it was usually total nonsense. It was exaggerated, hyperbolic, crazy talk. But they had to paint you out, or whoever the person they're declaring, they had to paint that person as a vicious, evil person. And because it was so obviously character assassination, it was really slander and libel. And that's illegal. And yet Scientology was doing it. And so when people started posting these on the internet and showing what Scientology has been doing to people for years, Scientology went, oh my God, well, we're being exposed. And so they stopped giving people their own declare orders so that they could no longer post them on the internet. And that's why I never got a copy of mine. I've never even seen
nothing if not pragmatic, I guess.
it. That's right.
Now, so you're still in high school and you start working for the church, is that right?
Right out of high school. I graduated high school in 1987. And that summer, I started going to community college, or I signed up for community college. And I'd been doing services at the Santa Barbara Church of Scientology for a couple of years while I was in high school. And then when I graduated, they really went in on me and recruited me to work for Scientology.
Okay, so your full-time job was to work at what was it, an org, or was it a mission?
Yes.
Or what was it?
It was a church of science. It's called a an organization or of the Church of Scientology. They call them orgs rather than churches.
And this is where they do their auditing, like
Yep.
their counseling, as they put it, auditing.
Correct.
So with the auditing, you're on the e-meter, you're holding the two cans, and it's kind of like a lie detector, or at least that's how they use it apparently. And so they're just asking you about you, kind of deal. That's all, and it's all about you. So
Yep.
that's where I think people get suckered in, because that a lot of people, they have to think of others first, or they feel that way. And so my wife is that way. She always thinks of others first, and I keep telling her, you gotta be a little bit selfish. You take care of yourself first. And so she's getting better at it, but she's still. But in Scientology, it's all about you. So it feeds your ego in a sense, the way that I perceive. And so they're so interested in you and what you have to say and what your opinions are and what you've done. And so that's how they get people in. And then it just gets, they put up, the one thing I was fascinated with was the bull baiting. Now, to me, that, like, what they do is they just yell at you or something, and you're supposed to not react at all in
Yeah,
this
basically.
part of the thing. So
yeah, it's a training exercise. There's Scientology is a complicated system. There's a lot to it. Let me clarify that Scientology is not a book like the Bible. that you focus everything around. It's a series of books. There's about 25 of them. And there are countless, thousands, literally thousands of lectures that L. Ron Hubbard gave over the years from 1950 to the early 1970s. I think his last lectures are like 1974 or something like that. So between all of that time period, you have L. Ron Hubbard lecturing and lecturing and lecturing. Sometimes for, he would do these congresses, or he would get people together for special classwork, and it would just go on for weeks. And he'd be lecturing every single day, and all of these were recorded. So the body of Scientology materials is over 5,000 of these lectures, thousands and thousands of pages of issues and bulletins and policy letters about, the mind and life and techniques for developing people's personal power and stripping away their trauma and all that kind of stuff. There's just countless numbers of processes and techniques that make up the body of Scientology. So this has all been organized around this concept of this bridge, and you're crossing this bridge, and they group all of their technology accordingly. And there's training actions in Scientology to train you how to become an auditor or counselor for Scientology. And there is the auditing practice itself, which is the techniques being applied to a person, sometimes using an e-meter, most of the time using an e-meter, but not always. And the auditing techniques are what are supposed to be reaching back into your past and relieving you of all of the collective stress and trauma you've carried around, not just in this lifetime, but in all of your past lifetimes as well, because Scientology's basic belief is that you are an immortal spiritual being who has been around pretty much forever, and you can't die. So you're going to live into forever in the future. And the problem that you're facing, according to Scientology, is that you are stuck in this endless cycle of life after life after life. You live a life with a body that you own, right? This body that you carry around with you. And the body dies, and you have to go get another one, a baby body, and you have to grow it and live that life. And then that dies, and then you have to do it again. And you're compelled to do it over and over and over again. You can't break out of this cycle. And Scientology gives you the tools and the knowledge and the auditing processes that are supposed to be able to break you out of this cycle and allow you to be a powerful, causative, in the driver's seat, spiritual being who can decide on your own bat, do you want to have another life, or do you want to go off and create your own universe and be a god? And that's kind of the power that Scientology promises to its adherents, which is why they become so fanatical and pay so much money. Because if this was true, that you could do this, oh my God, right? It would change the world. And that's what Scientologists think they're doing, is they think they're changing the world through all these techniques and practices. Unfortunately, the problem is none of this works.
Yeah, because if that were true, then Hubbard would have been able to cure himself of his ailments, right?
That's right.
And he had many of them. Like, he had bad eyesight, and if he was a powerful Thetan, like he said he was, he would have been,
well, maybe if he was such a powerful Thetan, he wouldn't have died alone.
Yeah.
Basically, a failure, a drug-addled, completely lost the plot. I mean, he was paranoid, and I don't even know what word to use, senile. I mean, he was crazy at the end.
Yeah.
And he was alone. He had gotten rid of every single person who ever loved him or tried to help him. He was a failure. His life was a disaster. And that's the product of Scientology, right? Like, these two things don't go together.
And that's one thing I always take away from what the interviews when I see Tony Ortega, is he always says that, Hubbard lived a fascinating life. He had no no need to embellish.
Correct.
He did a lot of things and went a lot of places. I mean, his dad was in the Navy, right? And
Yep.
so he traveled a lot, and they weren't without means. He didn't want for anything. So,
That's
yeah.
right.
Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Now, so how long did you work at the org for? And what were you doing? Were you just recruiting people? Like, is that what was your job?
Okay, so yes, I joined staff when I was 17 years old, right out of high school, and I worked for 8 years at the Church of Scientology in Santa Barbara until I was 25 years old. And what I did there was mainly I supervised classwork. I was kind of in a sort of a teacher or instructor role. In Scientology, the way they run their classwork is not really classical school sort of setting. It's more of everybody studies at their own pace, and you have a classroom and you have a supervisor who oversees the students, answers their questions, makes sure they're making progress. And that was my job for the most of the years that I was there. I either supervised classrooms or I was overseeing the administration of the auditing, the counseling delivery. And eventually I rose up to an executive position where I oversaw the classwork and I oversaw the delivery of the auditing. That was my role in the organization.
So you never had to go on the street and body route people into the.
No, I did a few times. We would do all hands activities where everybody would kind of go out for a half hour or something, try to sell books or drag people into the building or something like that. But I hated doing that stuff. I was more of an upstairs guy. I wasn't an on the street kind of guy.
So did you have to give the personality test? Did you?
Oh
have
yeah,
to do that?
yeah. Administered those.
The Oxford. What is it called? Oxford.
The Oxford Capacity Analysis.
Yeah,
Total bullshit term. Has nothing to do with Oxford University at all. They just slapped the name on it to make it sound like it was legit.
It's like 200 random questions, and
that's right.
And they tell you what your problems are and how they can help you, and that's how they get you in. Yeah, so
that's right.
So after the 8 years, you joined the elite. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. When I was 25 years old, I doubled down. I said, well, Scientology is not accomplishing its mission. I'm not making it make it here in Santa Barbara. We're not taking over the town. We're not clearing the planet. We're not bringing Scientology to everybody. And I was pretty upset about that. And I thought,
can I just interrupt you for?
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Working at the org there, how much money did you make?
Oh yeah, it was about $20 a week.
20 bucks a week?
Yeah.
Oh my god! And you had to. How did you live on that?
When you work for Scientology at any level, whether you're working at the city level at a city level church, or whether you do the billion-year contract and you go all in like I did, when you do either of those things, you're considered. You sign legal documents that are legally enforceable that classify you as a religious volunteer. The church is not obligated to pay you a dime. You're committed to working for them, and you acknowledge that you are a religious volunteer who may or may not make any money on a regular basis, but you will get Scientology services for no charge. And that's the sort of exchange that you get for working there is you get free Scientology. And normally Scientology costs lots of money. So it could be advantageous to do this in terms of saving money. Unfortunately, they kind of screw you over because when you sign up for staff and you start working there, there's a lot of mandated classwork and activities you have to engage in that distract you and take time away from you being able to do all that free Scientology. So unless you've got a lot of free time on your hands, you're not going to actually be able to do it. And that's one of the push-pulls of working for Scientology is it's ostensibly you're supposed to get it for free, but they never give you any time to do it. So, it's just another way of taking advantage of their people.
Yeah. So obviously $20 a week is not enough to live on. Did you?
Well, exactly. And you're making
a job outside of that.
I had other jobs outside of the church when I was in Santa Barbara for all those 8 years. So I was working a full-time job, and then I'd go work another full-time job.
Man, so what kind of jobs did you have?
Oh, so many different kinds. I worked sales. I worked at the library. I worked for a stock company. I did I worked for an insurance adjusting company as the office manager. I did a lot of different stuff.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
oh, okay. That'll lead me to another question later on. But
Sure.
so joining the Sea Org,
Yeah.
so that came about. You felt you weren't doing enough, and so
Yep.
you thought you needed to do more, and you
That's
joined
right.
the Sea Org, which is like it's like the most dedicated Scientologists ever. Like
Correct.
they live and breathe and do
Yes.
Scientology. That's it.
24/7. 24/7. Basically, when you join the Sea Org, it's analogous to joining the military. You are separated from your life. You are living on a base with other Sea Org members. You're not in a home or an apartment of your own. They birth you, they feed you, they clothe you in uniforms. It's a yes sir, no sir, how high sir kind of environment where you have ranks and ratings and uniforms. And it's very, so we call it a paramilitary outfit. And it's very much modeled after the Navy. This is what Hubbard built up as his core elite fanatical group of followers. They would join the Sea Organization. And in order to get into the Sea Org, you have to sign a contract of commitment of 1 billion years. And remember that in Scientology, they believe in immortality. So 1 billion years is just a little chunk of your eternity. Excuse me. You've already lived, according to Scientology's terms, you've already lived as a spiritual being for 4 quadrillion years. Quadrillion. There's a number you don't hear very often.
Quadrillion. What is that? Like a trillion,
right?
trillion or something?
Yes, it's 1,000 trillion.
1,000 trillion years.
1,000
Wow.
trillion.
And a trillion is 1,000
million.
Right. So, yeah,
So
bigger
we're
numbers
talking
than we're able to comprehend.
big numbers. Yeah, incomprehensible. You're simply not going to get your wits around a quadrillion. And so that's why I say, look, you've been here pretty much for eternity, right? I mean, you've been here forever. I mean, it's such a long period of time that Hubbard says this universe has been around. You know, scientists say this universe has been around for a few billion years. Hubbard says, no, they got it all wrong. And it's actually 4 quadrillion years when we as spiritual entities first entered this place. And he never says what we were doing before. He just says it was 4 quadrillion years ago that we showed up here.
Just all of a sudden.
That's right. There's no origin story for Thetans in Scientology. Thetan is the word they use for a spiritual entity. You're not a ghost. You're not a soul or a spirit. You're a Thetan.
Right.
I'm a Thetan. You're a Thetan. And we own bodies. We have a body. We're using a body. It's like a set of clothes. You know what I mean? It's not you.
Right.
And this is a very, very, this duality, this dualism sort of thing of body and spirit is it's a real viewpoint. It's a way of looking at the world that is inculcated into Scientologists. And I was raised with this viewpoint. So I thought growing up, this is how the world is. I never questioned this. Nobody asked me if I wanted to believe in this.
That was your reality.
Yeah, this is how the world is, kid. That, you know, like this is how it works. This is how my parents explained it to me. And so I never thought to question any of this. And for decades, I thought this was reality.
And so going into the Sea Org and working 24/7 for the church was not a huge commitment in your mind. It was just, this is just one 72-year section of a trillion-year story, right? 4 trillion-year story, which is going to continue on for many more trillions of years, right?
You got it. That's
okay.
right.
So, yeah.
And when you're thinking, and when you put yourself in that headspace and you think about the future that way, life looks really different. The whole world looks really different. All the problems and wars and cultural issues and conflict that exist in the world, you really get a very different perspective on it. You think as a Scientologist that you're above it all, that it's something that's happening that you're not really involved in because you see the bigger picture. You have a larger perspective. And for me, this was very empowering. I mean, just to kind of give a little bit of information to your audience as to, well, what's the appeal of this? Why would you do this? What was it about this that you found interesting? I thought I had one up on everybody because I thought I could see behind the curtain. It was kind of like imagining that you were Neo. You knew the Matrix existed. You knew it was real.
Yeah, right.
And when you have that viewpoint of the world,
it kind of creates a kind of arrogance almost.
yes,
you think you're special and you're above everybody else, and you've got the goods. You've got the knowledge, and so I see. So you join the Sea Org, and then you go through the boot camp. Is that right? There's a boot camp.
That's correct.
And then you come out process. You come out as an ensign. Is that right?
No, not an ensign. I think it's a seaman first class or something, or something like that. And then there's a whole rank system in there, and the ranks are not super important in the Sea Org. They're not really given a lot of importance. The Sea Org is about dedication to a cause and about loyalty and about compliance. Scientology, I should clarify that Scientology is very much a totalist compliance conformity culture. You do what you're told. And if you don't do what you're told, you're out. So you better toe the line. And they don't make it that obvious most of the time. Sometimes they do, but most of the time it's very social and very nice, and everybody's very pleasant with one another. But then, sometimes the gloves come off. And in the Sea Org, it's like the gloves aren't really there. As you get more and more committed, the niceness kind of goes away. And when you're in the Sea Org, it's hardcore. It's 24/7. It is dedication. You know what you're signing up for. At least they assume you do, even though they tell you it's all going to be wonderful. When you get in, you find out it's not really. And it's all about getting stuff done and making things go right so that Scientology is expanding and productive. And you're really not important. Scientology is what's important. And that's why I say that the Sea Org are really quite fanatical. They're willing to sacrifice themselves for the bigger picture.
Oh, it kind of suppresses your id. You can
put it that way.
Your needs and wants are not important. It's the corporation, the company, the goal is what's important. Right. So
that's right.
And so what jobs did you have in the Sea Org? Like were they specific? Did it briefly, because we're getting on to an hour here, and there's still a lot of questions I want to ask.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so 17 years in the Sea Org. I was a continental management personnel. I oversaw the delivery of Dianetics and Scientology across all of the Western United States. So I went from Santa Barbara, where I was overseeing it in one church, to I was overseeing it across the West US. I did that for about 8 or 9 years. I also
did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy what you were doing?
That would not be the word I would use. Yeah, it was
but you felt you had a purpose.
I did. I did feel that. Yes. In fact, that's the only thing that really kind of dragged me through 17 years of working for the Sea Org was purpose. I felt my life had meaning. Even if I was being physically and psychologically tormented, I was losing sleep, I wasn't eating right, I was malnourished, I was medically unfit. I mean, there were a lot of things that the Sea Org didn't take care of for me. But I did have a purpose in my life, and that purpose was very strong. I honestly believed that what I was doing and all the sacrifices I was making and all the pain I was enduring were for a purpose. And that can be a very, very powerful motivator for a person. And it certainly was for me.
And
so I ended up doing a number of different jobs, but they were all on the purpose of bringing Scientology to the world.
Right. And so now I worked in a lumberyard for 30 years. That's why I always tell everybody I'm not a writer, I'm a forklift driver. I just happened to write a couple of books. So, and a writer to me is somebody who writes for a living.
Mhm.
That's their job. So
Mhm.
anyway, I don't really consider myself a writer, but anyway, I don't know where I was going with this, but
Well, I think a
so
writer is one who writes, Jerry,
yeah,
and you've written a couple books, so you're a
yeah,
writer.
true enough, but I don't
Yeah.
know. My modest inclinations are to, not go there. So
Okay. Well,
anyway, I worked in a lumber yard for 30 years, and it was Monday to Friday, 7 to 3:30, half an hour for lunch, and you're in that industry, you're a slave to the economy. So when things are going good, you have to work a lot of overtime. Now, there
mm,
were times I called it massive overtime, which we would work 4 10-hour days and 2 8-hour days. So 6 days a week, you get 1 day off. And this would go on for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. Now, I found when I got to the end of that time, I was starting to go buggy. you know,
mhm.
so you're in the Sea Org and you're working 20-hour days, 18-hour days. Is that
Oh,
too much?
yeah, on a regular basis.
On a
Yeah.
regular basis, 7 days a week doing
Yep.
nothing else. How did you not go batshit crazy? Oh,
Well, who says I didn't,
yeah.
right? I mean, I tell you, there were a couple moments where I was pretty close to a full psychotic break twice. There was the pressure that's put on people in the Sea Org is intense. I wish I could analogize it to something that people could easily understand, but the only thing I can say that gets it across best so far is if I say, okay, you know how call centers work, right?
Mhm. Yeah, my wife
How
works here. Man.
the pressure that
Mhm.
is on a person, and sometimes to the point that the manager is standing over the guy, right? Get that sale or get
Mhm.
that product or do whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. And the pressure in call centers is like it's renowned, right? It's a reputation. Everybody kind of understands that, and it's for this intense period of time you're at work, and it's just go time, and it's go 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 go. And if you don't make your quotas, or if you don't pull off the work, most of the time it's like, well, maybe you lose your job or you just carry on until you come in the next day. But there isn't usually physical punishment connected with that. In the Sea Org, it's like that kind of pressure all the time. It's 24/7, 365. It's always like that in the Sea Org.
Wow.
And so you're kind of in an environment where you always have to be on and going and productive. And there is no such thing as time to slack off or screw around or something like that. That's few and far between is where you get moments like that. And if you're not producing your quotas, if you're not making things go right, then you are somebody who is making things go wrong. And
Mhm.
we are going to become very interested in why you can't seem to make your quotas and make things go right.
Mhm.
It must be that you don't want them to go right. And now we're going to find out why, right?
All
And
right.
this is
Yeah.
the immediate assumption in Scientology. And this is one of the biggest problems with it as a culture is
Mhm.
if things aren't going right, it's because somebody doesn't want them to, and we
Right.
got to investigate them and find out why and
Mhm.
deal with that. And that means you're in an awful lot of trouble all of a sudden, even though you were trying your hardest to get your job done.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter. You weren't getting it done. So now you're in the hot seat. And
Right.
now you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And there could be physical punishments like staying up until 3 a.m. washing dishes or cleaning out garbage cans or cleaning toilets with a toothbrush. Or maybe you don't get to sleep at all that night and
Mhm.
the next night and the next night.
No.
And there was a one time where I was up 5 days in a row
Oh my
on a
God.
project.
You must have
5 days.
been seeing,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
was seeing things. Like I
yeah.
got that was the only time in my life I've ever drunk espresso. I fucking
Uh,
hate that stuff, pardon my French. But I had to stay awake. I mean, we were
yeah.
getting vitamin shots. It was insane.
Jeez.
5 days in a row, I got like 2 hours of sleep. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
No.
And this is routine in the Sea
And
Org.
what I tell people is sleep is what I do best.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, working is what we did best in the Sea Org.
Yeah. Well,
And that's the attitude, is you're there to work. I mean,
yeah.
everybody's kind of, with it.
Everybody's gung ho and for the
Yeah, I mean,
cause
we
and go,
you
go,
get
go.
there and you're all young and dumb and full of
Mhm.
energy and other things, and you just want to get going, right?
Right.
And over the years of this, and years and years and years of this stuff really wears you down, because it puts you into an environment where you could be in trouble at any moment for not getting
Mhm.
your work done.
Yeah.
And if you do get your work done, they just give you more
More,
work to
more work.
do. They
Yeah.
just pile it on.
Yeah.
Your quotas are raised,
And
right?
then
Oh,
I
you
read
got
somewhere that
$100,000 this week. We're going to make it 150 this week, right?
man. So that those are the registrars, right? The ones who have
That's right.
to get the money in. Yeah. So
That's right.
anyway,
Salespeople.
just for a matter of perspective, in those 17 years you worked for the Sea Org, right?
17
17.
years. Yeah.
How many
25
days off?
altogether.
How many days off in those 17 years did you get?
Oh gosh. In all 17 years, I've never thought about all 17 years. 2, 4, 6, 8. I mean, I think I could probably average it out to about 6 or 7 days off a year.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'd put it about that.
And
Yeah.
then, but you were given time to like do your laundry and buy your sundries and all that kind of stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
what
That's
was it
built
like
into the
every second
schedule.
Sunday or something you were allowed?
Every Sunday morning you have what's called CSP time, Clean Ship Program. There's a ton of acronyms and abbreviations in Scientology. And CSP time is every Sunday morning. You get up and muster, and then you get to go do your laundry, clean your birthing space, and go out and do some shopping. And then at noon, you muster up and have your lunch and get to work. So Sunday morning was a brief period where you could get your personal stuff taken care of. And you were making in the Sea Org, it's $45 a week. Period.
Sorry,
Like that's it.
sorry,
That's
say
the
that
max.
again. Say that
45
again.
bucks a week.
45 bucks a week. Okay,
That's
but
what you got.
your food is covered, your clothing is covered, and
Correct.
your birthing is covered. And
That's
so
right. You got to buy your own socks and underwear because they're not going to provide that for you. And if you want t-shirts or, other clothes besides your uniform, you're going to pay for that out of that. If you want any snacks or alternative meals, because, what they were serving up was not always that wonderful. In fact, most of the time it sucked. So, you'd either buy food in the canteen where they had packaged food you could buy, or you'd go to the grocery store and load up on some stuff. And that was the weekly routine, is get some snacks, do your laundry, maybe get a new pair of socks or whatever. Women would have to buy their women's stuff with that. And that was the Sea Org lifestyle.
Now, was that consistent? You got 45 bucks a week every week, or
Nope.
were there some weeks you didn't get paid, or
Sometimes it was half pay, sometimes it was quarter pay. It all depended on the income in our organization on a week-to-week basis. And some weeks there were good income and some weeks there wasn't. And if there wasn't, we didn't have the money to pay the crew because we had to pay the electric bill, or we had to pay, for something else. And so we didn't have the money. When we would put on big Scientology events at the Shrine Auditorium on a regular basis, like every New Year's, we would have a live New Year's event. That Shrine Auditorium cost us $75,000 to rent for a night. And all of the organizations in LA in the big blue buildings would have to collectively pay for that. And if we didn't make enough money that week to pay for that and for our food and for all the other bills and cover the pay would be the first thing that would be cut. And so we wouldn't get any money that week.
Oh man. So
yeah, stuff like that happened
well,
all the time.
So I guess when you got your $45, did you get it in cash?
We did.
Okay,
It was
so
distributed every Friday in cash.
Every Friday, 45 bucks in cash. So would you save some? Would you put some away just in case for those weeks where you weren't going to get paid?
Yeah, I tried. There was when I became a salesperson in the Sea Org after about 9 or 10 years of being in, I went from management over to sales, and I was selling the confidential OT levels and stuff. And when I was doing that, there was at that time a bonus system where you could make a little bit more as a salesperson. They canceled all that a couple years afterwards. But when I was there, I was able to sell books and lectures and services and make a little
extra
commission.
cash.
Make a little commission, yeah. And that's when I opened up a bank account for the first time.
And how old were you?
Oh, I was in my 30s at this point.
30s, and you just opened a bank account. Wow.
Yeah, pretty much like a real one. You know,
You
I had
had
one as a kid, but
you had no clue. Well, I guess you did, since you worked for the org for 7 years, but being in the Sea Org, you would kind of lose your perspective of what it's like to live in the outside world. Like,
very much.
Paying rent, paying bills, buying a TV, watching, did you ever get to watch TV?
No.
Nothing? Movies?
Well, okay. We did not have TVs in our rooms. There's no cable, there's no internet, you can forget all that. The exposure to the outside world consisted of walking by the news stands and seeing the headlines.
Oh,
and this is in the 1990s and early and up to the 2000s. I left in 2012. So during that time period, I had very minimal access to any internet. There wasn't any Wi-Fi on the base until literally a year before I left, when they finally put some Wi-Fi out.
Cell phone? Did you have a cell phone?
No, I did have a cell phone in some later years, because I had a job in the Sea Org where I had to go contact people, and I was out on the road a lot. And so when I was doing that work, I had internet access and I had a cell phone, because I was a trusted person who they counted on to not abuse that privilege by going and looking at stuff on the internet I wasn't supposed to be looking at, right? And I did. I thought policed myself quite effectively for a number of years.
That's a really effective thought control.
It is very, right? Because they convince you. There's a lot I could talk about with this, but I'll just say they convince you very well that it's not in your best interest to look at stuff on the internet that is anti-Scientology. They convince you that will actually harm your spiritual progress and growth.
Right. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like, I'm kind of falling down another rabbit hole of American politics, like being so close to the border. Like, I'm in Vancouver, so we're like, it's like a half-hour drive for me to the border to go to the United States. So we get all your news, all your programming, all, we're inundated with your advertising, with everything.
I'm sorry.
So it's okay, Chris. It's much more entertaining than the Canadian alternative. So just, other than Hockey Night in Canada, I would trade. But now that there are certain political movements that convince people to vote against their own self-interest. Things that are good for them, they vote against.
Exactly.
I find, and it kind of, I don't really want to get political, because it's not a political channel, but with the Republican Party and Trump, it just seems to me that they have no, how do I put it? They have no real goals. They just have culture wars and making people angry and afraid, and making them afraid enough so that they vote against their own self-interest. So anyway, cult, that's a lot like cult thinking.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to get off into that. So no problem. Like I say, this is a non-political thing, and I don't want to. I don't want to get.
We don't have to go there.
No,
totally fine.
You and I can talk about that off air some other time. No problem. Okay. So now, when you get into the Sea Org, did you get married? I did. Yeah. Actually, you're allowed to get married in the Sea Org?
Well, here's the deal, right? You can't have sex in the Sea Org until you are married. There's no premarital sex. There's not even supposed to be any heavy petting. And these are rules written down. If you violate these rules, you will be in a lot of trouble.
So if you give somebody a birthday kiss or something, like,
nope.
Yeah, that would be
Oh,
frowned upon, and you'd be pulled in for interrogation.
you
Hmm.
would.
Wow. So you got married. So how did you meet your wife?
Well, she was another Sea Org member, and she
Mhm.
had also just recently joined. This was back in '95. So I joined the Sea Org in June of 1995, and by October I was married.
No.
It happens fast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really. Wow.
yeah.
So
Well, I was
now,
25 years old. I was ready to go, right? And
yeah, and yeah, I
I
can
was very
imagine.
energetic at that time. And I met a woman, and she was a couple years younger than me, but it was fine, and we connected up, and we got married, and we stayed married for the 17 years that I was in. I didn't divorce her until after I left.
Wow. Okay. So
She stayed, and I left.
is she still in?
She is.
Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah. So now, so this was not a marriage of convenience by any stretch of the
No, no, I loved her
imagination.
and she loved
Yeah.
me, and we really tried to make a go of it. It was too fast. We should not have been married. We were
Yeah.
not compatible.
Right.
But we tried to make a go of it anyway. We had
Now,
our ups and downs, but it really
so
wasn't, it shouldn't have been.
so I imagine in the Sea Org, your jobs were not, like she would be doing a completely different job than you?
No,
Is
we
that
worked in the same unit. That's how we
Oh,
met.
wow. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so, now when you're in the Sea Org and you're married, um, are you still birthed in, apart? Like, or do you get to
No,
have an apartment or anything? Like, do
that's when
you
you get a room together. Yeah.
okay,
What
so
they
you
do is they have the Sea Org base is if you look at the big blue buildings with this big Scientology label
Mhm.
across the top of the building, that's the building we lived in. That's the birthing building on that base, and there are two birthing buildings. That's one of them. And so that's where all the Sea Org members live. That building is empty most of the day, for the most part, because that's where all the dorm rooms are.
Oh,
And Sea Org dormitory style living is bunk beds that are 3 or 4 high, like 17 or 18 of them in a room, and it's very crowded, and it's pretty messy, and it's a little smelly, especially with the guys, and it's just dorm style living. When you get married, they will move you and your partner into your own room, and you get your own space. It's a room, not an apartment.
right.
A room. So it's
Okay,
still shared restrooms and showers and all of that. That's all dorm style communal stuff. But
right.
at least you get a room with a bed for privacy, so you can engage in your marital activities without, people peering at you.
Yeah. Well, that's a good
Yeah.
thing, I
It's
guess.
a very
Uh,
utilitarian existence being a Sea Org
yeah,
member.
um,
It's
uh,
not about personal time or personal things. Sea Org
okay,
is a
no,
life of dedication and devotion to a cause.
right, so what would happen if you wanted to have children? Like,
You can't. Children are forbidden in the Sea Org.
for
So if you
it
get pregnant, you are basically heavily encouraged to get an abortion.
hmm,
And this is what they call an enforced practice. In other words, we're going to kick you out if you don't do it.
hmm.
And
So
that's,
kick you out in the sense that you're gonna be declared a suppressive person and you're
no,
out
you're
of the
not going to
church?
get declared. No, 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 no,
Okay,
no.
so
Don't,
you're
no,
just
no.
out of the Sea Org
Yeah, they're going to
and
kick
you
you out of the
become
Sea
a
Org.
regular Scientologist, okay,
Correct.
right.
Yeah. It used to be that they would keep you in the Sea Org or keep you on staff. Back in the 70s and 80s, they tried a period of time where they tried to raise kids on the base.
Hmm,
And they set up a little subunit to have the children be taken care of by nannies, in like 3 or 4 women who were taking care of like 30, 40 kids. It was ridiculous. It was gross. It was disgustingly unhygienic. The kids
hmm,
were neglected. They never saw their parents because the parents were working all the time.
right.
Maybe once a week, their parents and the kids got together for an hour, and it was a disaster. I mean, a disaster of epic proportions.
Hmm,
2 generations of Sea Org kids, probably a total of about 200 kids,
wow.
just their lives
Hmm,
ruined
hmm,
because the Sea Org got in the way of the parent-child relationship.
right, right.
And the parents did that, the Sea Org did that, and those kids were the victims of it. And
Wow.
to
So
this day,
they
you can
finally,
look them up and
but
find
then
them.
they finally realized the error of their ways and just said no
Yeah,
children. Okay.
that's right. They
Yeah.
went, you know what? This isn't working.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't even realize the error of their ways. Here's how stupid this is these kids were raised, became teenagers. Some of them got on board and joined the Sea Org and did the Scientology thing, but some of them were so alienated and victimized and abused, they didn't want to have anything to do with this crap. And
Right.
they ended up on the street and had to make their own way. And it was that bad. These kids were that neglected. And they came out and started getting on media lines and started speaking out. And that blew up as a PR disaster for the church.
Yeah.
And that's when David Miscavige, the leader of the church, said, okay, no more kids.
Okay.
As though that was the solution to this big problem, right? And
Yeah.
now we're going to force parents, to potential parents, pregnant parents, to have an abortion, even though L. Ron Hubbard wrote how bad abortion is. We're going to do that. And we're going to completely neglect any responsibility for any of these kids ever. And we're not going to ever acknowledge that we completely screwed up their lives. And we're just going to move on as though that never happened. And that's how Scientology dealt with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did the subject of having children ever come up between you and your wife?
Yeah, unfortunately, my wife and I actually really wanted kids. And we knew going into the Sea Org at the time, the policy was if you have kids, you stay on as a staff member, but we're going to send you to a city level church like Santa Barbara, like the place I came from. So I figured I would marry a woman in the Sea Org. Eventually, we would get pregnant and have a kid, and we'd end up at a city level church somewhere. That's what I thought was going to happen. Instead, after I joined and after my wife joined, who had the same idea, by the way, they changed the rules. And they said, no more kids, period.
Wow.
If you have kids, you're out of here.
Wow.
And we had a choice to make. And we were like, damn it. We really wanted kids. And we had to go, well, we're dedicated. We're hardcore. We want this to work. So let's stay and we won't get pregnant. And we decided that wouldn't happen. Then we got accidentally pregnant. And then it became an enforced abortion time. And to my shame, that's what we did.
Oh,
and,
man. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And that's what happened there. I've already told that story. It's old news, but it did happen. And I was not happy about it. But that was the choice you had, is either get the hell out and go have your kid and we're going to think you're a scumbag, or stay, be loyal, get the job done, and screw the kids. Right?
Ouch. Yeah. Not being a father, my daughter is my stepdaughter. I met her when she was 2, but I'm the only dad she knows.
Sure.
But in my early days, I was in my early 20s, I dated a girl and we had actually broken up, and she had told me after we had broken up that she was pregnant. And she wanted to get an abortion. I didn't. I said, no, let's have this baby. I'm excited about this, and because both my parents came from big families. I have 1,000 cousins and I have 4 sisters who are very fertile, and I've got 10 nieces and nephews, and I love them to death. And I just had so much fun with them. So I thought, being a dad would be great. And then, but as it turned out, she had a tumor on her ovary. And the doctors told us that the baby would be born either deformed or severely retarded. And so we decided, well, we'll just have the abortion during the operation to get the tumor. But that decision was made for us because when they administered the anesthesia, she miscarried like right away. And so apparently that's a side effect. But anyway, I still think about that. Like, it still affects me. What would that baby look like today? What was son or daughter? I don't know which, so that still got a weigh on you.
Oh yeah, no, that's why I talk about it with some degree of emotion, is because it does. I have a son from an earlier relationship, which was not a marriage situation, with another Scientologist years before I joined the Sea Org. And he was raised by his mother in Australia. She's Australian. And so she raised him in Australia. And so I've met him. I went out there and finally connected with him. after I left Scientology, because the whole
Right.
time I was in, I was never able to get out there.
Right. Yeah. Well, good for
Yeah.
you. That's awesome. Yeah. You know, a son would be, you know, so often being able to teach him to play hockey and tell him not
Yeah,
to
see, I never
not
got to do any of that. For my
not
kid,
to be
I
a
didn't wait
goalie.
until he was an adult.
You know,
Yeah.
teach him not to be a goalie. Yeah. So, okay. So you're married and you're in the Sea Org and you're totally dedicated to the cause.
Yep.
And this goes on year after year, you know, abuse after abuse. You're just taking everything they've got, you know,
Too much.
and, you know, moving forward and keeping with the cause and whatnot. So what finally gets you to question the, like, what was the seed of doubt that was planted in your head that made you start thinking maybe this is not the right path for me?
Sure. There were a number of them, actually. It was a series of steps because very rarely does somebody, especially in the headspace I was in, have a one and done, have some kind of one thing happen and you just turn around and walk away, right? I had a lifetime of commitment to this belief set. So it took a long time to wear that down. And it took a series of incidents, starting with a pretty big betrayal on the part of the church to me, where I went and did a very, very excellently executed project, if I say so myself. And I got shit on for it, basically, right? I got told it was, you know, I didn't really do that good of a job and who cares and no big deal. And we're not going to do that again. And that really opened my eyes to what was going on at a certain level regarding management, which is where I worked at the time, where I saw that the busy work and the sort of, you know, frantic emergency, everything all at once now, that was more important than actually getting things done. And I found that absolutely a huge contradiction. It
So
made no sense.
everything every day is a crisis.
Oh, everything, all
you're
day,
crisis
every day.
managing constantly.
Yeah, constantly. Either this organization is about to be evicted from their building, or this staff member has just committed the most egregious violation of the rules and has to be dealt with, or this guy over here isn't getting the job done and has to be dealt with, or we have to send a bunch of people off for training. And so we have to qualify them and get their lives set up and do all the logistics so they can go off to Florida for a year and train on some super duper special new program that's coming out. There was always some kind of emergency to deal with. We were constantly being fed a steady stream of emergencies.
You're
And
under
that's
the
how
gun.
they keep you in a mindset where you can't think too much about what's going on around you because you're so wrapped up in all the emergencies you have to solve. You see what I mean?
For
It
sure.
was
Yeah.
crazy. It's
So
really frantic.
you're constantly under the gun. You have to,
Constantly.
you know, some problem solving, you know, 2.0, you know, you just always problem
That's
solving.
right.
Well, and then so
That's right.
that's what got the seed of doubt planted. Okay,
That's what kind of
I just want to read
started.
something from your book here because
Yeah.
I marked a few passages that I
Oh,
thought
yeah. What you
were
got?
really interesting. So now on page 38, there is as well the concept from Scientology ethics of the greatest good for the greatest number. Unexamined critically, this concept appears to be a truly wonderful idea. If you help others when you can, then you think, of course, help is going to be returned to you when you need it. If you bring spiritual freedom and eternal survival to others, then of course it will be revisited back upon you. One finds this is not true at all. The greatest good depends on the eye of the beholder and whose good is being served. There are people who are more than happy to use the greatest good to work people to the bone and make them feel guilty for not doing even more. L. Ron Hubbard was one such person. David Miscavige is another. They have perfected the sort of guilt-oriented motivation to an exact science. So I think that's just brilliantly written.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yeah, so that's what you're facing in the Sea Org every day is just this constant barrage of problems. And so, you know, you can't do the good for the greatest number. You know, you can only solve the problem that's sitting in front of you. So,
That's right.
you know, So that's what you have to deal with in the Sea Org, and so this is where your doubts start to come.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so how does it fester?
And that was 10 years before I left.
Wow, holy
It
cow!
took 10 years to break this down in my mind, step by step by step over the years. And there were a number of things that happened. That was the first thing.
Okay, I got to stop you for a second because we're approaching an hour and a half here. Are you okay to keep going? Like, because
I can go. Yeah, I'm fine.
I find this fascinating. So I don't know,
Yeah,
I don't
no
know how
problem.
long
Maybe
we're going
another
to go
half
here.
hour or so.
Okay, sure. I'll keep an eye on the clock here because I still have 2 full pages of questions.
Well, if we want to do this again, I have no problem with that.
Okay, I'm sure
I am a talker. It's true. Yeah. I am a talker.
Okay, so you're going on to more seeds of doubt here.
Yeah. So there were other things that happened. Really, in a nutshell, there were just more abuses, right? There was, sleep deprivation and work and stuff like that. I got put onto this kind of prison program, which we don't really have time to get into. It's a big, big thing. But it was 3 years of my life was spent in a program in Scientology in the Sea Org called the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force. It's like a re-education prison camp. And I ended up there because I was, kind of disaffected and I wasn't happy and I wasn't really, thinking that what I was doing was working. And so they put me in this program, and it took me 3 years to get done. And at the end of it, I could see even more clearly how off the rails the organization was, right? I kind of had some time to do a lot of self-examination and relieve myself of the burden of an awful lot of my criminal actions and transgressions, as they say in Scientology. I wasn't really a criminal. It's just they really exaggerate your misdeeds to make you feel bad about them.
Right.
So so if you commit some error or problem on your job, you're a criminal, right? It's like that kind of thing. So I finished all that, and I could see even more clearly things weren't right in this group. And I kept trying to persevere and make it work anyway. And finally, by 2012, I was like, I'm done. I got to get out of here.
Okay, so just a quick question on the RPF.
What's that?
Just a quick question on the RPF.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you. One of my rules is never interrupt your guest, but
no problem.
I just got to get this question in. Most people who went on the RPF did not get through. Is
Correct.
that right?
Yes.
So getting through is a huge accomplishment.
I mean, for me, it was. At the time, it certainly felt that way. I have a perverse pride about it because it was such a challenging thing to do.
Right. And
even now, I'm like, yeah, motherfucker, I got through it, Yeah. Again, pardon my French. But yeah, I did get through it. And about 70% of the people who do it don't. They end up leaving before they're done. And they just end up leaving the Sea Org. They can't get through the thing, and that's fine. They don't always. Sometimes they get declared suppressive, but most of the time they don't. And they just kind of leave out the back door and never come back. And I persevered and I got through it because I was motivated to do so. I had a wife, I had a life, I had friends. They were all in the Sea Org. This was my entire existence. I couldn't see not making it through this thing. I had to do it. So I got through it, but there was a lot of clarity brought with that program of what the environment was I was in. And it was clear it was not a friendly environment. I was in a hostile environment, and I had to learn how to deal with that.
Okay, now is that when the realization that Scientology was not achieving any of the goals that it claimed to want to? So
that's when that started becoming a lot more clear.
So the doubt started to fester in your head.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
That's right. Mostly though, at this point, it was still in my mind. It was the organizational goals. It was the big goals. I still believed, even up to this time that we're talking about, right? Not now, but at that time, that Scientology worked. That the techniques and practices and theory of Scientology as a philosophy, I still believed in all of that. I thought it was 100% true. I thought David Miscavige, as the leader and the organization, the structure and the way we were doing things, that's what I had a problem with.
Right.
And I was not alone in that. Most people who leave Scientology these days, that's where they see the problems first, is they see it with the leadership and with the organization. They think the practice of Scientology one-on-one is brilliant, but they have a problem with the organization and how it's doing its job, right?
So did
Or
you
the promises.
consider Hubbard to be infallible, like the perfect
No, I
human?
didn't think he was infallible. I thought he was a man.
But the
But I
technology was infallible?
but the technology was infallible.
Okay,
What
so
he wrote and the methods and techniques of how he wrote what he wrote, right? The auditing processes and the classwork. I thought all of that was a solid, integrated, workable whole. That's how I thought about it.
Wow. Okay. So I asked another YouTuber that question, like if he thought Hubbard was infallible. And he said he never really thought about Hubbard much. He thought mostly about Miscavige. Of course, he's younger than you, and you
that's
probably know him.
interesting.
Aaron Smith Levin, I think you probably know him.
Yeah. No, that would be true because there was a generational shift. I mean, I grew up in Scientology in the 70s and 80s. That was my life.
Yeah.
And L. Ron Hubbard was the leader of Scientology when I was growing up. There was no David Miscavige.
Right.
He came along in the 1980s and he really took power and really became a presence in the 1990s. And I had already joined staff and I was already really active in Scientology when David Miscavige came along.
Right. So Hubbard was your guy and Miscavige was kind of ruining it all for you. Okay. Okay.
A little bit. Yeah.
So let's move on to where you leave the Sea Org now.
Sure.
So at this point, your relationship is falling apart. You're with your wife, and you're, and you're having serious doubts because you're in Minnesota, and the problems are not, you're not seeing how the how the dots are connecting, and it's starting to really become an issue for you. So how did it finally end? Your time.
Okay, so the final nail in the coffin of my Sea Org career was what I was out on a project out in Minnesota. I was not in Los Angeles. I'd been out in Minnesota at the church out there for a couple of years. I'd been working off and on projects out there. And so I was out there on this big project, and I just kind of had this epiphany one day. It just hit me like a flash. It was like, oh my God. I realized in my day-to-day activities, every single day of the week, and I was working 24/7. I was always on the job. So I realized that I was actually telling other Scientologists and people around me lies. I was lying to them in order to get them to do what I needed them to do. Come in and do a class, pay money for a service, these kind of things. I was trying to convince public level Scientologists to get back in and do services. And in order to do that, I had to lie to them. And I kept doing that. And it finally hit me. Oh my God, I'm telling more lies than I'm telling truth to people. This is crazy. What am I doing with myself? That I have to do this, right? Because I was compelled to in order to get them to do what I needed them to do. If I told them the truth, they wouldn't come back in.
So compelled, you mean you're ordered to?
I was forced by circumstances. If I was going to bring somebody back in, I couldn't tell them the truth. I had to kind of curve it a little bit, right? Like, for example, if I was going to recruit you to work at the church in Minnesota, which is one of my functions, I had to tell you, oh yeah, you're going to get days off. You're going to get paid. Oh, you get all these free services. And I knew from 25 years of experience with this, that there were no days off. You're not going to get paid and you're not going to get all the free services. But I had to say these things to convince them to do what I wanted them to do, because if I didn't get a new recruit, I was going to be in trouble. That was my quota, right? That was my work. That's what I mean by being compelled to do it. And I realized the bind I was in, and I was like, oh my God, I can't get out of this. This is always going to be this way, and I'm not okay with this. And that's what the final aha moment was of, oh my God, not only is this organization a bit off the rails, and not only is David Miscavige not getting the job done, but we're lying to people. We have to, this is what my life has become. And I was like, I got to stop this. I got to change this. And I'm 42 years old at this point, right? My life is half over as I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, where am I at? All those free services I was supposed to get, I didn't get one in the 17 years I was in the Sea Org. I didn't make any Scientology progress.
Really? How far up the bridge did you get? How far up did you get?
I got to clear.
Okay, so you're clear.
And I expected as a Sea Org member to get onto those OT levels, to do the big high level confidential stuff. And I could never get the time to do it.
Okay.
Because I was always working.
Okay, so personal question.
Yeah.
In the book, you talk about a girlfriend that you had in Minnesota. Okay. Just stop me if I'm going too far.
No, you're fine.
If it gets too personal. Now, was she the reason that you and your wife broke up, or was it because of your disaffection with Scientology?
It was my disaffection with my marriage. I mean, I had a full life, right? I had a marriage, I had a job, I had my dedication to Scientology. And all of those things were kind of falling apart on me all at once. The marriage was not a good marriage, and we were apart more than we were together the last 4 years of it. I mentioned I was off and on in Minnesota. Well, my wife was in LA. And so we were talking on the phone on a daily basis, but I was the one putting out more communication than her, and it started to feel uneven. And that went on for like months, which turned into years, where it was just kind of this uneven. We weren't really on the same page. And I started having issues and problems with the organization, with Scientology. And I tried to communicate some of this to her as my wife, and she wasn't having any of it. She was treating me just like every other Scientologist would.
Right. Yeah.
And so we didn't really have a close, intimate relationship. And she wasn't a confidant. She wasn't somebody I could share my real feelings with. And so that's what tore the marriage apart. And so, it's kind of like, despite Scientology and despite all this crap, we managed to stay together for 17 years, but really the last few years were a bit of a joke for me. And
so you met this other woman.
And so then I met this other woman out in Minnesota who was a staff
immediately.
Yeah, we connected
immediately, and you just off. It just hit it off, and you knew it was like this is meant to be kind of deal. And so, but she's a Scientologist, right? She's a staff member.
Yep.
Okay, and so now as your disaffection continues, you try to route out. Is that right? You tried to leave quietly, and do this to leave, or did you just up and leave?
No, okay. So there's two ways you can leave the Sea Org. You can leave by escaping, just take it off, jump the fence, get out. And if you do that, you will be declared a suppressive person.
Right.
The other way you can leave the Sea Org is to do it through what's called the official route out line, where you follow a series of steps that they dictate. And by following those steps, they clear you security wise. They want to check you over. They want to give you an interrogation. They want to roto-rooter your life, right? They want to make sure you're not leaving because of all of your criminal acts, because that's what they assume. And so they make you jump through all these hoops. I wanted to continue doing Scientology. I didn't want to be declared a suppressive person. I still believed in it. So I jumped through all the hoops. It took me 9 months.
9 months. Wow.
Yeah. I had to go back to LA. I started divorcing procedures against my wife because we weren't really together anymore. And
was she on board with that? Was she in agreement, or was it an
upset?
Amicable?
No, she was upset about it.
But it was amicable?
I wouldn't call it amicable, no. Okay. She was pretty pissed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she didn't know about the other woman.
Right.
I had kept that secret.
Yeah, but was she more pissed that you were breaking up the marriage, or that you were leaving the Sea Org?
I think it was both.
Okay.
But I think she was kind of fed up at this point too. I mean, it had been 17 years. It was not a satisfying marriage for either of us. So it was, it was kind of time.
Time to,
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to do any of this to her. The marriage had already fallen apart.
Right.
It wasn't like I had an affair and then my marriage ended. It was my marriage ended.
Mm-hmm.
It was in name only, and
Mm-hmm.
then I had the affair. You see
Right.
what I mean?
Okay. Right.
Okay, and maybe that's just rationalization, but that's kind of how it went.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went back to LA, I did not confess to having this affair because that would have gotten the staff member in question
Yeah,
here
of
in a
course.
lot of trouble, and I didn't want to get her in trouble.
Okay, so you're doing these interrogations on the e-meter, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
now you found the e-meter you were able to manipulate it?
I was able to beat it. Yes.
Yeah, so like you're supposed to get a floating needle right when the interrogation is
Yes,
over.
right.
And so and,
There's a
and so
needle
you were
on
able
the
to get
dial.
you were able to get that even though you were lying your teeth off. Yeah,
Well, I wasn't lying my teeth off. I just wasn't saying a particular thing. See, the way
yeah,
you do it is you don't lie.
right.
You just don't talk about certain things,
Oh, okay.
right?
Oh,
If you're asked a question in
mhm,
a Scientology confessional, the auditor, the confessor, is sitting there with an e-meter. It's an electronic device, and
mhm,
it's got a needle on a dial, and the needle moves around. And when you're asked questions, if the needle responds to the question, then there's something on it, and we're going to get an answer. So if I'm asked a question, while you were in Minnesota, did you do anything bad? I mean, that's not a good question, but let's just say that's the
kind of an
question.
open-ended question, yeah.
And it's an open-ended question. There could be a lot of answers to that
Mhm.
question. And it reacts, sure, I'll tell you about something bad I did in Minnesota, but I'm not going to tell you about her.
Right.
So I'm not lying. I'm just not talking about that thing, right? And this might seem like a nicety, but I'm explaining how you beat an e-meter is what I'm telling you.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's how I did it, is I would talk about other things. And then legitimately, right, you'd
Mhm.
get this reaction on the e-meter that tells you you're done. The needle floats. It does this back and forth kind of thing. And then you're done with the question. And then you move on to the next question.
Right.
And
So
I had received 1,000 hours of this kind of confessional processing when I did that prison program, the RPF.
right.
So I was well experienced
Mm,
at
mm,
receiving and giving
mm,
these confessionals.
right.
And
Okay.
that's how I got out of the Sea Org without confessing to this one particular thing I had
Yeah.
done.
Okay, so now
So,
you're out.
yeah,
You're out
now
and you're
I'm out.
clear and you know, you're not declared, you're just a regular Scientologist now. You're
Correct.
public, as they
Yep.
say, right? Okay.
Yep.
Now, what happens with the other woman?
Well, I go back to Minnesota. Okay, so I left the Sea Org and I spent I needed a support system because I had nothing. I had no job, no car, nothing. So they gave me $500 severance pay.
Mhm.
17 years of my life and I get 500 bucks.
Uh,
So and they took my clear status away from me, by the way.
oh,
So when I left the Sea Org, I was in the exact same place on Scientology's levels of indoctrination, that bridge.
uh-huh.
I was at the same place as the day I walked into the church on day one.
Uh,
I was all the way back to the beginning because they took it all away
really?
because that's what Scientology does. It
Yeah,
wasn't even because I was in trouble that they did that. They just do it because that's what they do.
right.
So I had to do the entire bridge over again, and I had to start from the bottom. And I was kind of okay with that. I was going to do it because I still believed in it.
Mhm.
And I went up and I stayed with my mom, who provided me a support system for a month while I was up with her. She bought me a car. I was looking for a job. I was trying to get my feet on the ground. I was trying to get acclimated to the new real world because I had
And
been
how
in
old
the
are you?
bubble world. What's that?
How old are you?
40. Well, I'm 53 now. I was
Okay.
42 when this was 43 when this was all
Right, so
happening.
you're 43 years old and you're just beginning your life,
Correct.
basically. Okay,
Total reset.
no credit history, no driver's license, no nothing.
Nope. No, I had a driver's license. I
Oh,
had a
you had a
driver's
driver's
license.
license, okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean,
so
I went to public school. I had a regular life until I was 25 years old.
right,
I just the Sea Org was 17 years of absolute
Okay.
craziness.
So you had a driver's license before you went in, and you
Yeah,
just got it renewed as the time went on. Okay, I got you.
correct.
And
Yeah.
then and so
So
you're out. Yeah,
I had some experience, but not lots and lots.
right. So you're on your way to Minnesota.
Well, what happened was, yeah, I spent a month in Sacramento with my mom. And then I got a job in Minnesota, long distance, because I was trying to get back out there.
Right.
And I wanted to connect with this woman, right? And I also wanted to get on with my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was divorcing my wife. My ex-wife at this point, right? I was done with that. She stayed in the Sea Org. We were totally Dunsville.
Mm-hmm.
I needed a job and I didn't know how to get one. I put a resume together and it had Scientology all over it because that's all I'd been doing.
Right.
And I had no idea. I had no idea how toxic Scientology was considered in the real world.
Mm.
I was in this bubble world where Scientology was the greatest thing in the world, right?
Right.
And I had no idea what the real world actually thought of it.
Uh,
So I wasn't getting a job and nothing was really working, but my mom helped me out and I managed to get enough, stability that I could get a car and I got a job in Minnesota with a Scientologist out there. And I drove out there and I started working there and I connected back up with that woman. And life looked like it was going exactly the way I wanted it to. And then I had to go get on the internet.
yeah.
Because now I had unfettered,
Access.
completely, total 100% access to the internet. And I was now willing to look at stuff that I hadn't been really willing to look at before.
Right.
And I wasn't looking for nasty stuff about L. Ron Hubbard. That just gradually came in as I was looking at this other stuff. I was looking at stuff that was critical of David Miscavige, and that stuff that I could agree with because I knew he was not a good leader or executive, and I had bad opinions about him.
Right.
Then I started reading all this stuff about him and how he was beating on his staff and he was, a real dick and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God. Then that led me to reading about L. Ron Hubbard and all the lies about him. And that was where my eyes started opening.
Where the walnut cracks and you're just wide open and you're
wide open. Yeah.
That must have been a shock to your system. Like,
took me 3 months to go down and down and down and down the rabbit hole.
Like,
and
did you suffer any health effects from that? Because the mind can be a strange thing and just,
Well, no, I did not. But it was funny how the day after I read the OT3 stuff, I did start feeling a little sick.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, I'm going to die, right? The whole thing. That was very funny.
Okay, that's another rabbit hole we'll go down another time. But I'll just say that if anybody wants to know the OT3, the Xenu story, just watch the South Park episode. I think it's season 9, episode 17 or something like that. It's called Trapped in the Closet. Yeah, and so it's hilarious, but it's not factually true. Like there's some things that are not true in it, but it gives you the general idea.
Oh, I think it's pretty
close. Yeah, it is pretty close. But there are things,
it's a pretty accurate representation of Scientology, that episode.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, but yeah, I laughed so hard when I watched that for the first time.
Well, that was one of the things I watched.
Oh, really?
Because I had never seen a South Park. I'd never even heard the word Xenu.
Oh, really? That's right. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The whole time I was in Scientology, that's a confidential word.
I know. The vast, well, one thing I've learned is the vast majority of Scientologists never know about the OT3.
No.
They don't get there.
No. 5%.
Wow. 5%.
5%.
Well, what's the percentage that get all the way to the top to OT8?
Oh, maybe less than 1%.
Wow. Holy cow. Man, that's, like I say, another rabbit hole we'll go down another time.
That's right.
Okay. See, there's another quote from your book. You quote Carl Sagan. I love this quote. Well, 2 quotes actually. So, science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. which is a really good way to think about it, because nothing in science is inherently true. It's just a theory that's been proven to a certain point, right? And then it can be disproven with one experiment if somebody finds that right experiment, right?
That's right.
Then I love this quote. This is good. It pays to keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. That's my favorite one.
I love that. Yeah. Open mind is a good thing, but not, not extremely so. So anyway, we're coming to the end of our time here. I would like you to plug your channels.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Your YouTube channels.
Yeah, you can find all my work. You can find my whole complete story to
sorry to interrupt again. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're one of my favorite YouTubers. I check out almost all of your stuff. And so you literally have hundreds of hours of content on YouTube. Is that right? Like that?
I do. Yeah.
So you want to go down the rabbit hole. That's a good place to go. So plug, you got more than one channel. Is that right?
I do. I have a main YouTube channel, which is my name, Chris Shelton, MSc. And that's, by the way, my master's degree is in the psychology of coercive control.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So
that's what I went and got educated on.
Okay.
And it's right up the alley of cults and domestic violence and trafficking and that kind of thing. That's what coercive control covers.
Right.
And it was completely appropriate to, cultic studies.
Yeah.
So
not an easy subject to get a degree in. Like it
was a tough one.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, are you going to continue on that path? Are you going to get your PhD, or are you going to?
Oh, don't know. I haven't decided on that yet. Getting a PhD is a little expensive, and I don't really have the money for that right now. But I do have ideas that could end up with me getting a PhD in terms of research material and writing I want to do. So I am still working with academics on that path. In the meantime, I've got some papers to write that I want to get published in academic journals, but that's pretty far future stuff. Right now, I'm mostly focused on my channel. I've got my main YouTube channel, which is my name, Chris Shelton, MSc. I've got a separate channel where I post clips out of my main work, and I call that channel my Critical Clips channel. And because people have asked me questions over the years, I do a weekly Q&A show where I answer people's questions. And so I've clipped out over 1,000 answers to different questions I've given over the years. And that's on my Critical Clips channel. And I post on there Monday through Friday. So there's 2 channels of content you can get from me. There's my book, Scientology A to Xenu. And that's an audiobook as well as a published book you can purchase through Amazon. And yes, thank you for plugging that. I always love that. And then I have a Q&A show every week. I have a podcast I do called the Sensibly Speaking Podcast, which posts every Saturday. And I have a live show that I do right here with my wife every Friday night called Critical Conversations. So that's my regular content. So if you follow my work, you can find me 7 days a week posting content. And it's fun stuff. And and then every Monday I have a show that I do with Tony Ortega called After Scientology. So 4 pieces of regular content every week.
Is that the Straight Up and Vertical?
Yes.
Is that program?
That's right.
Yeah. I find Tony Ortega endlessly fascinating. I watch all his interviews. Like he just has such a wealth of knowledge, and he has such a entertaining way of conveying it. And so I really enjoy his stuff. And I joined the underground bunker almost right away after I saw that first Leah Remini thing. And so
cool.
Let me see that. Oh, just a few quick questions. Okay, just rapid fire.
Sure.
Marvel or DC?
Marvel. Oh, actually, hang on. It's a tough call for me. I will say Marvel because of this guy, Iron Man.
Okay.
But I am a huge Batman guy too. So it's tough. It's a tough one
it's
for me.
50-50. Okay. I'm more of a Marvel guy, but I do appreciate DC. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh God, these are tough, man, because I'm actually 50-50 on that too. I'll say I'll say Star Trek. If I had to, I'll say Star Trek.
Okay.
Because it puts forward a better future for us
Okay.
for real. You know what I mean? As opposed to Star Wars, which is pure fantasy. So
right, and then in Star Trek, Earth is a thing.
yes, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
So Batman is a your
I'm
man.
big on Batman.
I
Yeah.
I have to admit, like I was a big Spider-Man kid. Like I loved Spider-Man. I used to watch the cartoon endlessly and the comic books and all that. And I love the Spider-Man movies, but when I never ever heard of Iron Man until that first movie came out. Like I don't know how I missed them, but but I did. But that movie was so cool that I just I thought this is my guy, you know. And Robert
That's
Downey
right.
Jr. was so good. I just said, you know, this is my guy. Now, are you a gamer? Do you video game? Okay,
I do video games and board games.
okay. So what video games are you into?
Well, mostly the video games I play are almost all versions of the board games.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I do have Age of Wonders 4 that I'm learning right now, which I'm just getting into.
Yeah.
But I really like Board Game Arena as a website because it's got, you know, Ticket to Ride and Seven Wonders Duel, and my wife and I play all the time. We really like civilization type games, Scythe and Civilization New Dawn, and Through the Ages is the one we're just picking up on now.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of go the other way. Dead Space is my favorite game.
Nice.
I got obsessed.
Nice. I really liked I played to death Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, the Middle Earth based games on PlayStation. I played the hell out of both of those.
Yeah.
And I like Gran Turismo for car racing, and
I'm a Forza guy.
Like
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Now how many Jehovah's Witnesses, there are 8.7 million worldwide. Mormons, there's 16.8 million. How many Scientologists worldwide?
About maybe 30,000.
So it is such a small,
tiny
organization, but it just does so much damage and has so much money.
It really does. It really does. In terms of, I mean, we should be clear in terms of, and this I can actually speak to from a bit of an expertise point of view. It's not just my status as an ex-Scientologist that I say this. In looking at and studying cults in the world, Scientology actually is one of the most dangerous ones because there are more thought reform and mind control techniques in Scientology than there are in almost any other group you're ever going to be connected with.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it really is that way.
Wow. Now, yeah, I don't want to get into that. Celebrities, it's been coming into the mainstream now with the Danny Masterson trial. So, how much of a negative effect is that trial, do you think, is going to have on? Because a lot of the Scientology came into the trial, which was surprising.
Oh, very much so.
And then he was found guilty. So it's like, and so Scientology kind of got to be going crazy thinking about that.
It's finally a legal fact in a criminal court of law. And this is a first. I mean, Scientology has not been prosecuted, and it still hasn't. Danny Masterson is a Scientologist, and he was prosecuted. But the Church of Scientology was a major player in the Danny Masterson trial because organizationally they took specific and exact actions to cover up Danny Masterson's criminal activity. They really did try to hide it. And this was proven in court and is now a legal truth. It's fact. And that's a big deal, but it's still so fresh. We don't know yet what that's going to mean moving forward. We are very, very hopeful that the LA County DA or the FBI will look at Masterson's case and Scientology's influence in it and decide to prosecute or take further action. We know that there's a grand jury that is formed in Los Angeles County on the subject of Scientology, but we don't know a damn thing more than that. And we're hopeful, very hopeful, that the prosecutors will decide to move forward but we're waiting with and bated breath right now. We really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, those stupid grand juries keep it secret.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay, Tom Cruise.
Yep.
I see over and over again people that say they'll boycott every Tom Cruise movie. Are you in that camp? Or do you go
I
see
just
Tom
can't
Cruise
stand
movies?
watching the guy. I don't boycott him on principle. I just can't stand watching him because every time I see him, I see him.
Right.
I can't suspend
You
disbelief and watch him play a
right.
character.
Yeah, you can't separate the character from the
I
man.
cannot. I
Yeah.
personally cannot. I do not tell people boycott Tom Cruise movies because I know they're not going to. He's an international superstar. I can't stop Tom Cruise's career, but I can't stand the guy. That's
Yeah,
my
fair
own.
enough. Yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. But my point of view is I have a few members of my family in the entertainment business, in the movie business, and so my point is that if you're going to boycott a movie for the presence of a single Scientologist, you would have to boycott a lot of movies because there are Scientologists
There's a
all through
few.
the
Yeah.
industry, and so I just think that boycotting is a useless endeavor anyway. Like it just so I just don't think that. Yeah, just
You mean we're
there's
not bringing Walmart to their knees this week?
Yeah,
It
no,
doesn't really. It does.
no.
And I am willing. I'm perfectly happy to support anybody who has on moral principles refuses to purchase a product or
Yeah,
frequent
exactly, for
places.
sure. Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't care, right?
yeah.
I have
Everybody,
my
yeah,
things,
yeah.
but
Everybody,
no, boycotts have never. I've never seen an effective boycott really do much of anything
yeah,
except maybe
totally.
Bud Light. Bud Light seems to be getting it
Seems
pretty
to
hard
yeah,
right now.
yeah, I know. That's
Yeah.
yeah, that's one example, I guess. But yeah, the boycott Tom Cruise movies things, just to me, you're punishing everybody who worked on the movie, and there are
Well,
thousands.
that's true.
So
You are.
sometimes it's thousands of people who are
Yeah,
not Scientologists. So
that's right.
I just don't believe it. Now, if I come across, sorry, I'm going way over time here, but
Yeah, go ahead.
these are just questions that, like I said, I still got another 2 hours of questions here. But anyway,
Well, I'm not gonna carry on for 2 more hours, but tell me what you let's do a couple more.
I'll cut it down to a couple more. Now, if I come across a Scientologist in the wild, how, is there anything that I could say to them or talk to them about that would plant a seed of doubt in their head, or are they just so far gone that
I
nothing is gonna?
mean, in the wild and you're a stranger to them, no, not
Mm,
really,
mm.
not really. I
So,
mean, maybe expressing some degree of pessimism or doubt in their direction will be better than nothing.
mhm.
But I would never antagonize a Scientologist or try to debate them or get into a fight with them about it. That would be counterproductive. That's the kind of behavior that's going to cause them to actually double
They'll
down
double
on their
down,
beliefs.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't want that. The piece of advice I have on this, or the general guiding principle for me, is don't activate their fight or flight.
Oh,
Don't piss
okay.
them off.
Yeah.
Don't make them defensive.
Right. Yeah.
That's when they double down.
Mhm.
The general rule, if you have somebody you can talk to, you have an opportunity to talk to them about some other cult. Hey, did you see Shiny
Uh-huh.
Happy People? What'd you
Uh,
think about it?
right. Yeah.
Right? Oh, did you see
Mm.
Wild Wild West? What'd you think about it? Right? Some other cult thing.
Right. Right.
That's how you plant seeds in a cult member's mind on a
Wow.
passing basis, right? If you just have a
Yeah.
few minutes.
Now you mentioned in your book that writing it was very cathartic for you,
Yeah.
right? And so I found the same thing when I wrote Hockey Nobody, that I dealt with stuff that I hadn't really dealt with, and even though I was a well-adjusted, happy person, it just these issues were still in the back of my mind that I really, especially with my dad,
Yeah.
because my dad and I didn't have the best relationship. So
Mm.
how was it cathartic for you, and what about the writing process really brought out these? Because you like in your case, like there had to be a ton of demons down there, and like, you probably beat yourself up quite a bit, I would imagine.
You're not wrong. No,
Yeah.
you're not wrong at all. There's been 10 years now of recovery, and I wrote that book within the first, I think, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And those were a series of essays and articles and video transcripts that I put into a book form, because it was written over that whole time period. And there's 3 chapters in there about recovery and things I was learning about recovery. I've learned a ton more since then.
Mm-hmm.
The breakdown of Scientology and understanding it, deconstructing it, explaining it to people is very cathartic, because it helps me in my process of unlearning it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You teach somebody else about it, and you're kind of taking it apart for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the biggest boon to me, you could say, of putting it all down in writing. And I've been a writer my whole life. I've always been writing, so
Oh,
it's a very natural medium for me. It's not something that I find hard to do.
right.
And so writing well is whether I do that or not is a debatable point, but getting the words out has always been very easy.
Uh-huh.
But it's also when you're writing your pain, and when you're writing the causes of your stresses and traumas, and assigning actual responsibility to yourself and to other people for the various aspects of it, and trying to get across to other people just what happened, it really forces you to take a good hard look at it. And that's the catharsis, I think, for me at least, that writing brought.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned in the book you might write a future book on the RPF experience. So is that
Sure.
in the works, or
I was hotter to trot on that all the way up until they canceled the RPF, and then I was like, oh well, it's not really a thing anymore. So I'm not sure. I still have it in the queue as a thing, as a project to do, because I was going to do it in such a way that it still would work. It was going to be a compare contrast with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
right?
And Scientology, ironically, produces educational material and materials promoting human rights,
Uh-huh.
and they do really good work on that.
Really?
Yet they violate people's human rights
Every day.
daily.
Yeah.
It is the biggest hypocritical position I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Is the Church of Scientology promoting human rights?
Well, I read quite often these lawsuits that are going through the courts now.
Yes.
Alexa Paris, and she actually painted a picture for us. I got her to paint.
Oh, cool! You got a real picture. Nice.
Yeah. So I don't have it in my office, but I'll show it to you.
Sure.
I'll email it to you. So now I want to thank you, because you took me to task one time, and it really affected me, like, big time. So yeah, when COVID came around, I got a message, an instant message from a very trusted source. So I didn't question it. I just shared it, and I shared it to you, and you messaged me, "You're going to kill somebody with this crap."
Oh, did I?
So I want to thank you for that, because you're right. I didn't question it, and I take pride in the fact that I question everything. I don't take anything at face value. Any news program, I double check it. I go to AP or Reuters or some other trusted Snopes.com, to check, is this real, and I didn't on that one occasion, and you called me on it, and I just want to thank you for that, because it just reinforced that I have to question everything. I can't take face value for things that even come from a trusted source. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. I hope I wasn't too rude there. It sounded awful.
No,
I got a little high horse sometimes during the COVID period of time. I'll admit it. But
yeah, it was succinct and concise, just like your book. So
well, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank you for coming on and being my second interview. I hope I didn't make it too painful for you.
You were great.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed your book. Read it this for the second time, and you know, I highly recommend it. I wrote a review on Amazon for it. So, Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. It's one of the best books you'll find on the subject, and I can't recommend it enough. I loved it. It's just so well written. Like, you really did a great job writing it. And how many editors did you use?
Just one.
Just one editor. Wow. Holy cow. And I didn't find a single mistake.
Thank you.
You know what? Not one. And you know, I kind of OCD on that. So
Me too.
my Hockey Nobody has one mistake on it. It's a punctuation error, but nobody has ever mentioned it. Nobody has ever saw it. And my wife is the only one who found it. And you would pretty much have to be a Rhodes Scholar to find it. But it's in there and it bothers me. And Ratfink has a couple in there that got through, but I'm not too worried about that. So anyway, I want to thank you, Chris. It's been great, right from Denver, Colorado, and hopefully I'll come through town and we can have a beer sometime and have more discussion. I'd love to have you on again sometime down the road, maybe when your next book comes out.
No problem.
If you release it, Teabag gets copy number 1.
Okay? No problem.
This guy gets copy number 1 signed.
No.
All right, buddy. Well, keep up the great work on YouTube. It's fantastic, and I really look forward to your videos. So take care, and we'll see you down the road.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, man. Have a good time.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, the one and only Chris Shelton. He's just an incredible guy. He just has this critical thinking thing down pat, and he makes you think. He answers like when you see his videos, he answers questions every week, and the questions can be quite detailed, and he really explains it well, and he's got a great personality. He's a super nice guy, and read this book if you haven't. If you want to know anything about Scientology, it's in there. So anyway, let me see if I can track down my outro music again. So crazy. Been a crazy day, a crazy story. What an interesting life the man has lived. So, and it's not over yet by a long shot, and I hope he comes on again. So thanks everybody for watching. If you watched till the end, it was a long interview. I'm sorry I only meant for it to be about an hour, but it just was fascinating to me, and I hope you stayed right till the end. Hit the like button, please, and subscribe if you can, and we'll be seeing you on Thursday, movie review day. Again, not sure what I'm going to do. I'll figure it out and I'll let you know. So have a good day, everybody, and we will see you in the funny papers.